invite you in this morning. We ask that you open our hearts to hear what you have to say. And we pray for Pastor Phil as he speaks, that you would speak through him. Say this in Jesus' name.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good to have you here. Good to have you guys at home online with us as well. I am excited. First of all, my name's Phil. I'm excited to start with you guys a new series. It's all about boredom. Okay? It seems a little odd, maybe, to be starting a series on boredom in light of everything around us seems to be quite exciting. But if you forget, like just 2 weeks ago, it was pretty boring, right? And it's interesting how these things tie into each other. I would say during this COVID-19 series, there was a very common phrase that was heard in most households across America, and it looked something like this. Shannon, thanks. Sorry, Shannon. For those of you at home, Shannon's our media person, and she gets a lot of gruff from me, so she does an amazing job, so we just have to remember that. Mom, I'm so bored. Anybody relate to this? There's a study on this that showed that mom is also used 10 times more than dad in that phrase. There's actually not a study, I made that part up, but I'm assuming if there was, that would be true. It's probably because, boredom hits us from time to time, right? It's pretty much a universal experience. And how many of you at different times in your life have thought, this is so boring, right? We've experienced this. And how often have we made decisions to try and avoid boredom altogether? We've experienced these things. And we're barely into this message, and I've already used the word bore in 3 different ways. And let's just take a look at this real quick. Here's the 3 uses of this word. First of all, bored means no focused interest. Okay? Boring is not worthy of my interest. And boredom is the experience of not being interested. Now, the most common way to define boredom in Western culture is I'm not interested in what I could do. Right? I don't want to do it. I could exercise, I could be involved in things, but I'm not. Boredom is generally viewed as unpleasant. It's an emotional state in which an individual feels a pervasive lack of interest and difficulty concentrating on the current activity. And almost everyone in their lives suffers from this. And if you'll bear with me, this series has an interesting place in our lives, especially with what we've experienced going on today. It might seem like this is a little bit out of left field, but as we go on, we're going to see why it is actually more prevalent and important for us to discuss now. It's not just because the kids were stuck at home for the season of COVID-19 and that we're heading into summer, at which point is the most common time where we hear that phrase, Mom, I'm bored, which is hard to believe with all the things our kids have to do, right? But I remember when I was a kid, I could say I was bored as well, with plenty of things to do, right? There's a funny phrase that ties into boredom from a TV show in Canada called Corner Gas, and it takes place in the Canadian prairies where it's flat as a pancake, well, much like Kansas, and tourists would drive through and they show up at the gas station and say, man, it sure is flat here. There's nothing to see. And the gas station says, what do you mean? There's plenty to see, nothing to block your view. And that's kind of how boredom is with us. It's like we miss the bigger picture. And here's my first point. What boredom is caused by 2 different factors. Boredom can be caused by internal factors and external factors that play into our ability to see what is going on. So internal boredom says, I'm not interested in what I could do, or I'm not necessarily interested or motivated. Like, I've thought about exercising. I could go for a run. I could get up and pay the bills or clean the house, but nah, right? Internal factors there. Whereas external boredom happens when what I have to do is just not that interesting to me, right? Maybe like sitting at the DMV, right? In some cases, maybe going to church. Hopefully not. So we have these factors. In all situations, there's a lack of stimulation that leaves us craving something else. We're looking for a relief in this. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. Did you know this about boredom? First of all, here's the first picture I want you to look at. Because boredom is a fork in the road. We come to a place where we have a decision to make, and we could go one way or the other. Right? This next picture, throw this one up. It's a starting line for something. It's really interesting. So here's my favorite way to describe boredom, and this is our series thesis for the next 3 weeks. Boredom is more like an idling engine than a dead battery. We want to unpack the complexities of boredom. It's a little bit more in-depth than we would think. We want to help you know what you need to know when you feel like you have nothing to do. See, boredom it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It can be leveraged, though. And for most people, we would connect boredom to a car with a dead battery. Like, we think it's not going anywhere. There's nothing happening, so I'm going to get out of the car and do something else, or I'm just going to sit here and wait, and hopefully something interesting will happen. But it's actually not true. Boredom is more like the car is started and running, but it's idling. It's in park. Because when we come to this place, like I said, it's a fork in the road. It's a starting line. You're going to decide to do something. You're going to decide to do something. Boredom will eventually take me somewhere. It's an idling engine waiting to be shifted into gear, and boredom can be a crossroad between something helpful or harmful. That's a reality. And it's interesting. Boredom it's not really an ancient problem. It more came about with the luxuries that we've had in more of our modern society. And the closest thing we see in the Bible to boredom is the idea of being idle. We don't find scriptures that talk about boredom, but we do find scriptures that talk about idle. Let's take a look at this in 1 Thessalonians 5:14. This is Paul sharing some good ideas to what we should be doing. We urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. Now, when we look at the latter half of this verse, we see like these are good things that if we have Jesus in our lives. Last week my message was on putting the gospel before your worldview. If we're trying to follow the gospel, these are good things for us to do. We help the weak, be patient with everyone, encourage the disheartened. But before that, the beginning half, it says, warn those who are idle and disruptive. It's an interesting piece. And even the word idle, if we go back to the original language that the New Testament of the Bible, the second half of the Bible was written in Greek, the word for idle, its opposite is very close to it. So the opposite word for idle is ergon, which means work. And then, interestingly enough, argon, without work, is idle. So the exact opposite idle is actually work and being productive. I think that's pretty interesting. So what we're learning from this, I'm painting a picture where we're going here, folks. Boredom is a problem of motivation, not opportunity. And as silly as it is, that little joke from that TV show where it says, there's nothing to see, and the guy says, there's plenty to see, nothing to block your view, it just comes down to the way we're seeing the world and what we're doing with it. There's lots to do, and this is something I would say, because my wife and I have a little hobby farm. There's lots to do. I just don't want to do it. We ran into this week in our own relationship where Melissa, she comes to me and she has this fantastic idea because we have a pool that we put in, but it's cold. So I'm from Canada and I don't even want to get in it. So I'm like, well, the kids will jump in, but she won't. I'm like, why won't you jump in? I'm not getting in. Well, we have a heater that needs to be hooked up. We have the heater. We have the parts. There's something to do. I don't want to do it. So boredom isn't a case of lack of opportunity. It's a problem with motivation. It won't satisfy what I want to satisfy right now. And it's actually very close to another word that we could connect to. And this is in Ecclesiastes 10, verse 18. It's a good one. Through laziness, the rafters sag. Because of idle hands, the house leaks. This is a word of wisdom from King Solomon, who is one of the wisest men in history. And he's talking about a house with a roof on it that's falling apart. Because the house needs some maintenance, right? The rafters start falling apart, and because we're not doing anything, it just starts leaking. There's some maintenance issues that weren't happening here. And studies have shown that boredom is actually predictive. Did you guys know that? It's predictive of certain things. Boredom is predictive of loneliness, anger, sadness, and worry. Let me read that again, and then maybe this will start helping us connect with where our nation's worldview and our people are thinking today. Studies have shown that boredom is predictive of loneliness, anger, sadness, and worry. The chronically bored are at higher risk of drug addiction, alcoholism, and compulsive gambling. And this isn't the only time King Solomon addresses idleness. He addresses this in Proverbs chapter 6 through 11. He's talking about ants, and he says this, "Go to the ant." And I'm like, "You sluggard." Now, I will say this. We're going to pause for this verse for a second. Whenever I'm not feeling motivated, when I'm called lazy, it doesn't really motivate me. So there's a truth to it, but sometimes we need a different way to get back on our feet. You're saying I'm lazy? Challenge accepted. Watch how far I can go. Right? But anyway, he's making the point. He says this, "Consider its ways and be wise. Look at the ant. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." So the ant is productive because it needs this for surviving and thriving. "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest." And here's the results. "And poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." Meaning, when we get caught in this place of laziness and idleness, good things are not what's coming. And more we're seeing this over and over. We just came out of 3 months of sitting idle. And where some of us are still in it. Right? Where do our minds go? Where do our thoughts go? Where do our hearts go? I would make the contention that in a season of boredom, it has been much easier for our society to allow the gospel to be subject to our worldview, where Jesus hasn't been first as believers. For non-believers, it's a different case. But for believers, this is where we have to look at it and say, who was Jesus? What did he expect from us? What does he desire of us? I'll get more into that in a minute. Here's some fast facts that my friend pulled up when I was asking him about his study on boredom. He said this. This is interesting. Men are more bored than women. Okay? Young people are more bored than adults. And extroverts are more bored than introverts. So boredom is universal, but some of us fall, whoa, nice. I'm a big fan of thunder and lightning, by the way. So I think that's part of growing up in the prairies as a Canadian farm boy, so you could see it coming. And it's really, side note, this is not part of the sermon. One time it hit right in our yard and my dad got hit by it. But it didn't turn him into like the electrical shooting man, which I had hoped it had. So if you're hoping for that, it doesn't happen. You just get like a really, really intense sunburn on the top of your head. Anyway, he's fine. He's good. He's fine. We just call him Sparky now. Okay. Interestingly enough, boredom is universal, but some of us experience it more intensely than others. Okay? Now, here's a statement that I think is really interesting, and this is not a biblical passage, but it's a quote from a Danish philosopher named Søren Kierkegaard, and it's boredom is the root of all evil. Now, we know, before you get, hold on, Phil, the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. And I don't think he's contradicting that, but I think he's making an interesting observation about boredom. Now, he was a guy who, in his study and in philosophy, he looked at the anxieties of life, and he is actually credited with inventing the word angst, right? And he had a lot to say about Christianity and self-awareness, and he challenged social ideas of the day, and he couldn't stand religion of his land, but later in his life he loved the gospel. But what he's basically saying is there's a lot happening when you think nothing is happening when it comes to boredom. And boredom is such a motivating force for people to do all kinds of things to ease the pain of life. Okay? The fastest way, this is an important statement. It's not in your notes, but if you're going to write something down that I say, the fastest way out of boredom for most people is self-entertainment. And here's where things get interesting. In my life, in the last little while, when I have been bored, I am not like anybody, or I'm just like everybody else, where this thing suddenly becomes the easiest thing in the world to grab onto. And in this most recent time of life, I found myself doing what most of us do, and that's getting on social media and reading through what people have to say. And all of a sudden, we're in a place where I've been sitting idle for a bit, and now I have a choice to go different ways. Do I end up finding myself in this great battle of social comments, social media comments, having conversation back and forth? Do I find myself in a place where media that I read causes my emotions to rise, and now I need to act on something that even 3 weeks ago I wasn't even thinking about? Or do I find myself on this, not on social media, but watching the last 3 years of whatever TV show there is on Netflix? There's so much to do right in front of me, and yet I find myself glued to my cell phone. And I never feel satisfied at the end of it. There's always more to do. So the fastest way out of boredom is turning to pleasure. It's turning to instant gratification. It's without purpose. Without purpose, your purpose is to self-entertain. When we don't have a purpose, our purpose is to self-entertain. Entertainment is a default purpose for people who lack purpose. And if you think about this, in my life where my biggest mistakes have been made, it's not been out of issues like, that rain is coming down hard. Did it just drip? For those of you guys at home, I made a comment about the roofs earlier. Our roof's not doing so good. But here's the thing. In my life, when I have been bored, I've made some of the worst decisions, not because I was depressed, not because I was hurting, not because I had other issues. It's just because I had nothing to do. So I went down the road of finding something that was self-entertaining and self-satisfying. And this is actually something we see in the Old Testament with one of the greatest godly leaders of the Old Testament, a guy named King David. Let me read from you real quick. When he got bored, this is what he did. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Amorites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So his army's gone and they're fighting, and he's just hanging out at home. Now, he didn't have a cell phone, right? Otherwise, he would have got in trouble in a different way, right? They didn't have Jerusalem Tinder back then, so to speak. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her, and the man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. See, when you're bored, you are in a dangerous and vulnerable position. It's a fork in the road, it's a starting line, and the engine is idling, and sometimes your defenses are down. So if we look at this, there's a verse that Peter shares in regards to this. When we're bored, what kind of happens? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Now, I'm not a pastor who spends a lot of time dealing with Satan, and that's for one reason. He is a defeated foe. Jesus has conquered Satan. But Jesus takes Satan seriously, and so does Peter, who writes part of the New Testament, and Paul, who writes a bunch more. They do take him seriously, so we do have to consider that. When you are defenseless, that's the easiest time for, so to speak, a lion to attack. And it's very interesting that when we look at this, is point number 2, when we get bored, Satan gets busy. Do you guys want to know that there was a substantial increase in the United States, a 12% increase of pornography viewership during COVID-19? In countries that were hit even harder, like Germany, Spain, and Italy, they had rates up to 40% increase looking at pornography during the season. Is that a coincidence? When we're bored, we're idling, and there is a place we can go, and when our defenses are down, sometimes we go where we shouldn't. So if we're going to defend ourselves against the dangers of boredom, we should first consider what causes boredom. So I want to look at 5 points here real quick of boredom. First one is laziness, right? It is possible to be lazy. It is possible to be too lazy to be happy. It's possible to lack a purpose when you're idle. Okay? Next one, it's when life is futile. When we're stuck and we're constrained and there's nothing that we can do, or we can't execute anything, when life basically loses meaning, you can find yourself in a place of boredom. Next is misplaced desire. My immediate desire keeps me stuck. When I'm trying to be entertained by something that is instant, I can end up in a place where I'm bored. I'm more interested in my self-entertainment in the moment than maybe healthy spirituality or healthy relationships or just health in general. Think about this. If any of you men can relate to me when you were a bachelor, it was much easier to stick some microwave food in the microwave to eat that than to actually prepare something that was healthy for us to eat. Right? I still have that. If it opens up out of a bag and I can eat it right now, I'm more gravitating to that than I am to something that says, open this, prepare this, mix this, take them another 20 minutes to 3 hours, and then you can eat it. I struggle with that. But it's healthier to take the time. Okay, the next one, need for novelty. Now, there are a lot of people, when they're just out there for something exciting, they want to achieve something, they're at a higher risk of being bored because they're always looking for that next adventure. And some of these people self-medicate to cure their boredom because life isn't exciting for them. The go people, they have to be aware of that. The last one here is monotony. Repetition and lack of interest in the details of our tasks leads to boredom. And anyone who experiences of predictable, repetitious experiences will find themselves in boredom. So now, all that to say, guys, I've spent 20 minutes setting this up to make a point for us. Satan is at work when we are bored. Sometimes he's not even at work. We just destroy ourselves. Now, if we take a moment, do you think that perhaps in light of what's going on in today's society, that if we hadn't been stuck at home for months, people wouldn't be quite as energized as they are today? Just process that. Just think about that for just a second. Now, I am not belittling the issue. If you feel like, Phil, you're diminishing what people's concerns are, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that idle hands, when you're not doing anything, you end up doing something, and that might not be the something you would do if you were busy. And in fact, right now, the majority of the rioters are young college students. They're not all of them. But they're out of school, and it's hard to find work. Again, I'm not trying to diminish the issue. What I'm trying to say is sometimes in humanity, when there's nothing happening for us, we get caught up in the thing that attracts us the easiest and quickest, and we connect with. And all of us respond differently. So there are some people right now, they were sitting at home, and then something came up that they believe in and want to fight for, they just jump on board with it. And maybe they weren't somebody who would normally do that, but now because there's nothing else going on, that's what they get into. And the problem with this, that I would say, is if you end up in this place where you're caught in social media reading stuff, you can get worked up really quick. And this week, I have something that I call the great unfollowing. And it was pretty satisfactory, actually. And I had to go through my Facebook. Whew! I had to go through my Facebook, and this is a weird morning, guys. Good grief. And I just unfollowed people. I stayed friends. I'm like, I didn't want to see their feed. I just want to see what's going. I'm on Facebook because I want to see what's happening in people's lives. Like, show me some picture of your kids. Show me your vacation you're on. Don't tell me why I'm stupid because I don't think the same way as you, or or process the same way. I might be stupid, but it's probably for different reasons. You know? And you think about this. Here's why this applies. When we find ourselves in this place of boredom, and I talked about this last week, and if you didn't get to see last week's message, I want to encourage you to jump online and check it out. When we find ourselves in this place, this is where our worldview, the way we see the world, will supersede the gospel. And I've talked to many, many Christians, and I'm guilty of this as well, where our American view of the world supersedes Jesus, or our social justice view of the world supersedes Jesus. And what do I mean by that? If boredom or our worldview can supersede the gospel, I would question whether or not Jesus would be in support of using violence to make your point. I know there are people who aren't doing that, but there are people who are. And I've heard statements where sometimes you need violence to make a point. I'm going like, well, if Jesus did that, the guy on earth, God, could have called down heaven's armies to make a point. And he never did. He never did. Jesus never used violence. He had anger at one point, and frustration, but he never used violence to make his point. And what did Jesus think about injustice? What did Jesus do about injustice? Put it on his shoulders, carried it up the hill, then got nailed to it and took it to the grave. Our response today, so much of it, I believe, has been spurred out of this experience of boredom, of allowing us to get caught up in the trap of deciding what is the most instantly gratifying thing in this moment. I'm guilty of it too. I was born in Canada, but I've been lately just making fun of those people. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm American and you guys are weird. That's my whole family who I love. And I even have brothers and sisters who are on different sides of the political view, but I love them. And in a moment where I'm bored, it's easy to want to get on Facebook or Instagram and just unload my thoughts about how I feel about what they're doing or what they're thinking. And then I have to ask myself, is Jesus first or is my worldview first? And in this place of boredom, here's the thing that I think is the most dangerous part of America right now, is I would say America is bored. They shouldn't be. We shouldn't be, but we are. Because so many things in our life right now are so easy to obtain instantly. We want instant gratification on everything. We go the easiest road first. We lack purpose in seeing the bigger picture. Right? If Jesus was okay with violent response, he would have done something different than dying on the cross. Okay? And he did something about injustice. He died on the cross. So here's my concern with this when I see the lives of many Jesus followers. There are a lot of bored Christians out there, and this is my third point for today. There are bored Christians, but the Christian life isn't boring. We follow God who's not boring and who is never bored. If you're a Jesus follower and you find it boring, then there's something wrong. Basically, the caution today is twofold. Boredom lurks in the shadows. That's one of the cautions. And it can take you into places you never wanted to go, saying things that you probably never would have said under different circumstances. And if you're still not tracking with me on this, how many of us were friends months ago, and now because somebody said something we don't like, we're not friends, or we don't like them? It's an interesting thought, but that's the world we're living in. On the other side of this, the other caution is this, Romans 14:12. So then, each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. Making an impact in God's kingdom, for God's kingdom, is how we combat boredom. We measure maturity in our church by how well we love God and how well we love others. So if you're looking at making an impact for Jesus in your life, you're probably not going to go down the way of boredom. That's negative. And I'll just give you a personal example. I could be sitting on my phone scrolling through Facebook or I could be building my relationship with my children as I sit at home with them. I can ignore them and look at the little screen, or I can engage with them and hopefully share with them the values and the concerns that God has given me to share with the world. Jesus saves, and he wants to save everyone. So that's the thing that I'm looking at. And here's a question I want to ask you to process. We got 2 more weeks of this. And if you just came today, I hope this is something that you grab onto. When you have nothing to do, what do you do? What do you gravitate to the most? I want you to process this in the next few weeks. When you come to a crossroad, which way do you normally go? The goodness about boredom is this. Bored people typically want out. Apathetic people typically don't. If self-entertainment is just a click away, then you need to tune in next week. But here's our bottom line for this week. Boredom is a preface to pain or purpose. The wonderful thing about the gospel, the wonderful thing about the joy and freedom, and I always point over here because we have this vision statement that why our churches exist. We exist to help people experience the joy and freedom that comes from a relationship with Jesus Christ. Is Jesus saved us so that we could be free from sin, but he also saved us so that we could have an impact on the world around us. The gospel, if the gospel is true, it doesn't need salesmen. It needs representatives. And that's why we do what we do. To step out of boredom and use it as a motivator to bring purpose to the world around us. To bring life to the world around us. Not because we have the power or strength to do it, but the Savior, our God, Jesus, who paid the price for us, we get to represent him to the world around us. So, you saw boredom not as an enemy, but a call to action. I think it changed things significantly. I'm going to invite the band up as I pray. So, would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for just a challenge of looking at our world, and sometimes maybe for some of us it's not boredom today, Lord. Maybe we're not bored. Maybe we're motivated by something. We have purpose by something. But for those of us who do get caught up in this trap of boredom and it starts sucking the purpose out of our life, God, let us use that as a motivation to get into a gear that does something significant for you. Help us to realize that we can find ourselves in a place of self-entertainment, trying to find the easiest step out, or we can do something significant by engaging with you, by worshiping you, by saying thank you for saving us, Jesus. Thank you for paying the price for us. We can take that gift and we can pay it forward. Lord, we thank you, we praise you, we worship you, Lord. Amen.
With one more song here, so please feel free to stand as we do.